And welcome back, everyone. To the Zanpakuto is a little late, obviously, but we're here. From Ricardo Player One, we have the question of what is the Zanpakuto of Zack Saturday from the Amazing Saturdays. Now I was vaguely aware of this show, but this was past the time where I was like watching a lot of cartoons, especially like this style. But eventually, this show is basically a family called the Saturdays who rescue and protect cryptids like Bigfoot, Loch Ness monsters, so forth and so on. So it's kind of a cool concept. Zack himself apparently is the reincarnation of a cryptid called Core, which is like a dragon-type cryptid that can control and manipulate other cryptids. So, how do we design a Zanpakuto for him? Well, first and foremost, style. It's going to be a Keto type. Hold. Its sealed form is a katana, like most are. Its release is hide until seen. Cryptid. It was kind of there, which is, oh god. Which translates out, roughly speaking, to Mikakunsen Sebuslo? And its Bankai is Cryptid Menagerie. Mi Katakun no Dabu Sun. Again, I'm using Google Translate, don't at me. Now, what exactly does a Zanpakuto like this do? What does it look like? Well, I think it weirdly enough takes the form of like a bone. Like I think if you've ever seen, weirdly enough, a movie to reference here, Blade Trinity, and the sword Dracula has, where the handle is made from a bone. Think something like that, except that's the handle. What does the this might be one of the most powerful yet versatile yet limited Zanpakutos I've ever created, because its Shikai ability is based on the name of the cryptid he calls out when he releases his sword. That's why it's cryptid. That's why it's just called cryptid, because it has an odd infinite amount of releases based on the amount of cryptids that actually exist out there, and so forth and so. Example: what if he called out the cryptid name of Sasquatch? Let's just say Sasquatch. I imagine it turning. What power does it gain? Now, I don't think you can just gain the powers of a cryptid. Not because you can't do that, because it actually wouldn't be very powerful. A lot of cryptids don't have powers, allegedly. Some do, but most. So I think you need to translate that into an ability that works. With a Bigfoot type creature, it'd be very hairy, strong, and powerful. So I think you would get something that looks akin to kind of like a cross between one of Zangetsu's older forms when it wasn't dual-bladed, and something like, say, Zabimaro, or something that looks a bit more like, say, the Tenseigan, or Tenseiga from Inuyasha. Like this fur-covered large blade that's essentially just a power tool. It's just very powerful. It can do a lot of damage. But what if you called out and said cryptid Yeti? Well, now, almost certainly, I think you'd have a similar-looking blade, still have the fur on it. It's thinner, maybe a bit more jagged, and it's able to summon a certain amount of snow or ice, because Yetis are Himalaya, so where there's a lot of snow. But what if you called out the name of, say, Nessie, for example, the Loch Ness monster? Well, then I'll have to imagine you have some sort of water-esque ability. Now, that's not to say it'd be the same for every single one, because there's multiple cryptids out there that are arguably the same type. There's Ogopogo, Champ, Loch Ness monster, Mokele Labembe. So I think you'd have to figure out a way to kind of diversify it a little bit. But maybe it's just like certain levels of water ability. Like Nessie is technically the strongest water ability you could unlock, doing like giant torrents of water, whereas Ogopogo is maybe more like throwing bubbles or something along those lines. But then there's others that are a bit more technical. For example, Mothman. How do you do an ability for Mothman? Glowing red eyes, fly fast. It's allegedly a bird, moth, human thing. I imagine like something with Mothman, you could do something that's a bit more like kind of warps the perception of reality, because it's alleged that this thing can kind of drive you mad a little bit. Hence the Mothman Prophecies movie, just to a certain degree. But I think like it's kind of like does a weird madness effect. In essence, you could have so many different Zanpakuto abilities with this sword that it becomes kind of broken in the wrong hands, or in the right hands. Like if you theoretically gave Aizen this sword, he'd be broken with his amount of Ryatsu. And again, we can go on and on with the cryptids. The Ahul is a giant alleged bat creature. I think like a sonic-based ability, like a sound-based ability could be cool. Not quite like Tozen Suzume Bachi, but something that maybe just does like a sonic blast. Like Sonic Boom! Something like that. The Jersey Devil, maybe that could be the madness-inducing one because like the concept of the devil. Mermaids, maybe you could do something that's like fires off scale, like a shot of scales or something like that. Again, I'm continuing to spitball. Kraken, maybe you do the Kraken and you do like something like multiple tentacle blades or something like that. Another water-based one, maybe you throw bubbles in the fashion. I don't think we definitely don't have a bubble-based Zanpakuto. That'd be kind of fun. The point is that this sword might be the most diversified and has the most diversity of any Zanpakuto you could theoretically ever create, because it could theoretically have nearly every type of ability you can think of. So you might be asking, why the hell would you make something so broken? It's actually very simple. Because it would have a very strong inherent weakness. And it wouldn't matter if you got mastered Zanpakuto or whatever. The Zanpakuto can't just automatically switch from one type of technique to another. You have to reseal the Zanpakuto and then reactivate it in order to use a new ability. So, which, again, in battle is difficult, but skilled individuals like a captain could do that. So if he ever became, like, say, a captain, he could, start with, release Cryptid Sasquatch, and then starts fighting, realizes he's outmatched, fires the ability that comes in, reseals them, and quickly just releases it again. Mind you, skilled enough individuals, skilled enough Shinigamis can release their Zanpakutos without actually saying the release command. So that, he could just reseal, and then, but he'd have to still flex his Ryatsu to do it. It would be tiring to rotate from too many of those too quick. And then the Bankai, Cryptid Menagerie. This is where you could have the full power of this thing on display. I think basically you now have the access to multiple cryptid abilities all at once, which might, and again, you might be saying, well, Zanpakuto can't have opposing abilities, which I'm guessing that was just Kubo's way of saying no, I'm not going to have a fire and water type Zanpakuto, which makes no sense really. Because lightning, water should work together. Ice and water technically are two different things. But, wind or ice, I don't understand why you couldn't have multiple elements, frankly. That really doesn't actually add up in my head. But I've found ways around that, like with Naruto Zanpakuto, he can control wind and lightning, but that's because it's not a wind or lightning Zanpakuto. It's a storm Zanpakuto. This is because he literally has a menagerie of creatures under his belt. Like when he activates his Bankai, the true form of his Zanpakuto, his spirit, probably manifests behind him, and he's literally just a secondary, larger bone shows up in his hand, and the bone in his hand lengthens, and so he literally doesn't even have to call out the Zanpakuto anymore. He just has to pick the right ability to the occasion, and in his Bankai, he can just rotate among them and dual wield two different abilities at once. The only problem is it's the sheer mass input, I think, would be a strain on anyone's brain. So I think it's one of those things where even though it's not tiring per se, it is mentally straining to do something like that. So yeah, and again, just because I can think of a lot of abilities you could add, but that doesn't mean he'd have a counter for literally anything. For example, he probably doesn't have a counter for something like Aizen. He has nothing that could break out of hypnosis or sense controlling. He probably doesn't have the ability, he wouldn't have enough Ryatsu to counter someone like Yamamoto with a sheer level of fire. Also, someone like Yumajika's Zanpakuto, his Ryu Kojaku, that's very unique. I would have to go through the entire list of cryptids that ever existed to figure out if that could have a counter to it or not, at least out of the cryptids. But regardless, that's my thoughts. I think it'd be a cool Zanpakuto, and it works well with this character's backstory. So that's my thoughts. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, though. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.